So we work with who I think is one of the greatest people in the world, the spotter pilot Wayne Davis. And so he flies around, he goes up, he flies out of Chatham Airport, and if a shark is within 18 feet of the surface, he can actually spot that shark. And then he radios to the boat, and the boat makes its movement and it goes to exactly where they're directing them to. Have you ever had teachers talk to you about communication skills and how they're vital in the workforce? No? Yes. Maybe? Yeah. Yes? Okay. Looking at this and being a part of this was, for me, one of the first times where I really saw communication skills to the extreme. You have Wayne up there, and he's saying, all right, you need to go 4 boat lengths to 1 o'clock. Slow back down, speed back up. And that captain has to be right there in sync doing exactly what he's doing, or what the pilot's telling him to do. He's also got to trust, because then we also have swells coming in. So Wayne's looking at that whole area. The captain is now listening to what Wayne's telling him to get Greg on the shark. Then at the same time, once Greg sees it, then all of a sudden control pretty much switches, and Greg starts giving the direction because now he has the eyesight and he needs to tell the captain how to maneuver so they can start the workup on the shark. We have 2 research projects that are taking place right now. So the first one is a movement study, and what this is looking at is the movement of the white sharks. So this is our tagging project and what we're doing to try to identify where these sharks are moving to. And this was an image that was put out by the newspaper last year, and it shows you a bit. I wanted to put this one in because it shows up in this area that we do see the white sharks up in this area even. But how this works is each of these, the red dots is an individual, tells you the number of individual sharks that were taken in on one of those receivers, and then the black shows you the number of detections. So there are 28 individual sharks that were swimming in and around Chatham, but the amount of times that they pinged in, which I'll explain in a moment, was over 14,000. So we're getting to know through the technology we're using, their movement as well as their frequency and how often they're around different areas. And the main tagging we're doing works with acoustic telemetry. So once Wayne radios down to the boat's going to go and it comes up on that shark. So you can see that Greg is off the pulpit of the boat there, and the hard part becomes, the shark has to be in just the right position in order to put a tag on it. So what's really incredible about how this research is working is we're not disrupting the shark's natural behavior. So when using the acoustic tagging, we're coming right on the shark, up on the shark. Well, it's free swimming, and it's moving completely on its own, and we don't control its movement. We control our own. That's again where that communication piece comes in, because the boat has to constantly be moving and turning to come back and work on the shark. But sometimes they'll follow a shark and just wait. It needs to be within at least about 3 feet of the surface in order to get that tag on it. So then what Dr. Skoma will do is, in this photo you can see the white tag right next to the dorsal fin there, is when that shark comes up into that prime spot, he uses what looks like a harpoon. It's a long dart, and he extends it down and he sticks the shark with an acoustic tag. And these tags have a battery life that will give us data for up to about 10 years, as long as they don't lose it for some reason. But once that tag is on there, then if the shark swims within 200 yards of an acoustic receiver, which looks like this, they're attached to buoys, which are positioned all around the Cape. But what's great is for white sharks, we're using acoustic receivers. But then there are lots of fishermen who are scientists who are working with striped bass, and they're putting tags on striped bass. So then they're putting receivers out. And then we have some shark scientists off the coast of the Carolinas, and they're putting receivers out. So the acoustic tag works with any receiver. So we get the funding for so many receivers out there, but then we get to work with other scientists, and at the end of their season, they'll call us and say, hey, we had these tag numbers, they're registered to you. What was this animal? And we'll say, oh, well, that's actually a great white shark. And so we can share data that way with other science team members. So again, once the shark swims within 200 yards of these acoustic receivers, it sends a ping. And you can almost think of that ping as being a text message. So it sends it right to that receiver, and it says, I'm white shark Scratchy, and I was here at this time on this date. And then every time it's in that area, it sends another message. So that receiver records all of that information and tracks it. The hard part about this, though, is that this isn't live information. So we then have to go out on a boat, we take the receiver out of the water, connect it to a laptop via Bluetooth, and download all of that information, and that's how we then track the shark's movements through that area. It doesn't give us a live feed. So this map shows you some of that data. So each of these dots is where we have a receiver. So looking at Cape Cod down here, this would be Chatham. Chatham leads to South Beach Island, which then leads into the Monomoy Wildlife Refuge. So we've named this area right here Shark Cove, where South Beach and Monomoy meet. This is where we see a very large seal haulout. Lots of seals, that means we're going to see lots of sharks. So that map I showed you before that had 28 individuals, that's down in this area. But so each of these dots, the bigger they go, the more detections from a shark that we had off that receiver. And this is just information from 2 sharks, Julia and Large Marge. And Julia is one who, we like to say she's a typical Cape Cod tourist. She usually arrives every year around Memorial Day. She's usually one of the first sharks to be detected. And then she often scoots away right around Columbus Day, like many of the other tourists in the area. And this year was actually interesting because Julia wasn't one of the first ones. And then we started looking at video footage, and we think she may have lost her tag. But then Large Marge was one. Are any of you guys from this area? People from all over. Does anyone remember a few years ago there was a photo that came out of a guy in a blue kayak with a dorsal fin trailing up right behind it? Okay, this photo then went viral and went everywhere, but that photo is of Large Marge. And you can see here, this is a shark who really likes Nauset Beach, like many people do. So she really sticks right here to this area. Right here off of the main part of Nauset Beach, she was detected over 600 times. Whereas Julia goes up towards Provincetown, but then she prefers to be down in this area. So this is information where, as I said before, in starting the nonprofit, wanted to fund the research, but then do you see how this can be useful to the lifeguards and the harbor masters who are controlling the beaches, being able to see which beaches and areas that we're seeing a majority of these sharks? The other part about this, though, is that this is showing us tagged sharks. This is also showing us information where we have a receiver. So a big part of what we're doing is trying to fund more receivers and put them in more places. And because white sharks were spotted off the South Shore, that's when Plymouth was said, okay, we want to buy some receivers. And that harbor master put it in his budget, and he bought 4 receivers so that they could learn, are sharks coming off the coast of Plymouth there? Similar in Scituate. It was a donor there who said, you know what, fishermen always say that there are white sharks out there. I want to know. So he made a donation to purchase a receiver so it could be placed off Scituate's coast so we could learn from that.
How much are receivers?
So the full apparatus is $2,500. So that's the actual receiver. Then it's the spar buoy it's placed on, the chain, and the mooring. So to put all of that together. And what was really cool this year is we actually had an elementary school up in Marblehead, and they got a grant. So we did a shark enrichment program with the school, but a lot of the community members were talking about sharks. They heard that they've been detected up there on the North Shore. These kids had an interest in it, so they got a grant, and a school actually funded a receiver off the coastline there. It was a little interesting when we went to deploy it because we deployed it during race week. They have yacht clubs from all over and sailing clubs, so the photo of us actually deploying it with these kids just shows 300 sailboats in the background for the area that we pinned to put it down. So, but when we went to check it at that time, we went up probably mid-September and there were no detections on it. But again, the key to all this is these are sharks that have tags on them, and there are many that do not have tags. The other tag that we're using is a PSAT tag. So when you look at this one, you'll notice that floater piece. So these are set to, they're put on the same way using a dart. The shark is free swimming. They actually just put a PSAT on a shark, Cindy Lou, on Monday. And these are set to pop off the shark. And then they float to the surface, and that antenna piece transmits the data to a satellite that we can then recover. And this shows us the shark's environment that it's swimming in. So they're set for usually 6 months or so to be on the shark. And then it collects in the depth that the shark is swimming at. It tells us the water temperature as well as the light penetration. So we're learning more about the environment in which these sharks are actually swimming. So many people, because you typically think of white sharks or most sharks being down in warmer water environments, white sharks, their adaptation is that they're endothermic. So they actually have the ability to adjust their their body temperature so that they can go into colder water. And PSAT tags give us that information to help support that and showing how cold of water they can actually swim to. The other tag that we have used up here, but it's more challenging to use, is a spot tag. And this does give live information on where the shark is. So it's a more expensive tag. It also has to be securely and strategically placed on the shark. The only way for a spot tag to actually transmit data is if the antenna is out of the water and is dry. So these have to be placed on the white sharks all the way at the very top of the dorsal fin, which you can see up there. And you can see this white shark is not free swimming. In order to put a spot tag on a great white shark, we do disrupt the shark's natural behavior, and we actually catch it. So a boat goes out, and it'll actually hook the white shark, and it'll bring it in, and they bring it onto this boat to tag this shark. This was Catherine. We worked with O-Search, and what they have is an old king crab fishing boat that has a cradle off of it. So they lower it into the water, bring the shark on, and then they lift the shark out of the water. And first thing that they do is put fire hoses into the mouth of the shark so that water is being pumped into the mouth and flushing over the gills so the shark is still breathing. And then they bring scientists onto this cradle, and they have 15 minutes to get as much information as possible. And one of the first things they do is they attach that spot tag, and they actually even attach it using a power drill. So it's nice and secure, and it's steady on the dorsal fin, because once that dorsal fin then breaks the surface, it sends a signal to a satellite that transmits to us so we know exactly where that shark is at that time. But because they have access to this very large animal, what you can see here is this is Brenda Anderson. She was on a team out of the University of North Florida, and she's performing an ultrasound on the shark. That's a portable ultrasound machine, so she's actually scanning to identify if this female shark is pregnant or not. This is Dr. Heather Marshall. And she is taking a blood sample. So a lot of looking at this, you're wondering, well, this must be horrible for the shark. So her whole PhD study was on the stress physiology of the shark. So taking blood samples and then monitoring their levels to see, is this actually stressing the shark out or not? As well as not just white sharks, she did it with a lot of species of shark that get caught on fishermen's long lines to see how, that bycatch does affect the shark. So we have multiple projects going on with these animals, but this is how the spot tag has to be placed. And then the spot tags give us a bit more data because receivers, since they're attached to an anchor, can only go to a certain depth where we can deploy them. So receivers are really deployed around the continental shelf in along the coastline. Spot tags, because they're on the shark and they work with a satellite, can give us images like this. So each of the dots represents a time that Catherine pinged in and gave us some data. So she was tagged off the coast of Cape Cod. You can see she, like what we see with many of the white sharks, actually went down and spent some time in the Carolinas, came down to Florida. She actually went in and hung out in the Gulf for a little bit, came back out. And then Catherine was a shark who, like another one, showed us coming out into the deep waters of the middle of the Atlantic. Before Catherine, there was another shark, Lydia, who, she had a spot tag on her, and it was always thought that these white sharks were hugging close to the coastline, that they were traveling up and down, going north and south. Lydia all of a sudden one day took off and started going out into the middle of the ocean, and then it became a big hype, like, is she gonna cross the mid-Atlantic ridge? And even in the UK, they even picked up on it and said, white shark heading our way, in some of their headlines. And she did. She crossed over the mid-Atlantic ridge, and then she kind of zigzagged back and forth. She never quite made it to the United Kingdom, but she then traveled south down the mid-Atlantic ridge. So there was some food source or something that got her out there, but we never realized that these white sharks were traveling to that extent until we started putting these more advanced tags, the spot tags on them, to get that data out at depths where we can't necessarily deploy a receiver. So they give us different data. So those are the three primary tags that we have been using. The pop-up satellite tag that tells us the environment in which the shark is swimming, the real-time satellite, and then the acoustic tag. And to date, we have tagged 101 individual sharks since the tagging program started in 2009. When you look at this image taken from the research boat, our other study that we're doing right now has to do with what you even see up here, and we have them all over our boat. GoPro cameras. they're very useful in shark research because the other project that we are doing is a population study. So this started in 2014, and a big reason for why this started was because people kept asking, well, how many are there? You know, we're talking about the movement of these sharks, we're looking at where they're going, but everyone wants to know, what's the population? How many white sharks are there? And when you actually want to count a population for white sharks, it's not like we can do a census like we do for people. It's a bit more complicated than that. So how this project actually works is working with the spotter pilot again. They go out and they get on a shark and they take GoPro footage of the shark. So they put the GoPro in the water and they take a full body scan. And they go down the left side of the body and then they maneuver the boat and they try to get a scan down the right side of the body to get a full profile image so they have a full clear picture of what the shark looks like. So this video will show you getting that scan. So the camera goes in the water. You can see it's going to take a sweep. Going down the side of the shark, and then we try to get that other side of the shark. So that showed you how both sides. And then they'll go back and they get as much footage as they can because it's not the video footage that tells them the identity of the shark. Then what they do is they take screenshots of that video. So they put them into freeze frames and they start looking for any identifying markings on the shark. So we as humans are identified primarily by our fingerprints. You know, you can be cataloged and everyone has a different fingerprint, and that's how we can acknowledge that one individual is different than another. White sharks don't, or any sharks don't have fingers, so you can't rely on that. So we look at different parts of the body and we take these screenshots and then we zoom in and we look for markings on it that mark that shark as an individual. We try to have at least 3 features on each shark that mark it as an individual. And so on this one you can see that there's one mark on the dorsal fin here, this white spot with another gray spot in the middle that can be used. What's great about if we can get a marking on a dorsal fin is that then we've actually identified from some of our aerial footage from Wayne that same shark, and we're actually able to catalog which sharks from the aerial footage based on some of the markings on their dorsal fin. Primarily a lot of the markings we're finding that help us to identify are along the gill slits. So white sharks are known for that counter shading and their coloration, and right along the gill slits where the white transitions into the gray, there's often different splotches or marks of the white that can help mark them as an individual. So we look to that area a lot, but then we'll also use the caudal fin and looking at the upper or lower lobe. Sometimes they have markings on those, but also looking at the shape and the notches, that can help in marking them as individuals. But again, we want to try to have at least 3 because sharks can change over time. Just like we may change our hairstyle, or you might have an accident and you have new scarring or something on your body. You know, white sharks will fight out there with one another. Sometimes when they try to fight or bite a seal, the seal will fight back. You know, I referenced before white shark Scratchy. Scratchy is named Scratchy because he's got claw marks all over his face from where a seal didn't want to become his dinner and actually fought back and scratched up along his head. And so then as we get this footage, doesn't matter if the shark has a tag on it, whenever we see these sharks, we put the GoPro in the camera and we get these video footage of the shark so then we can compare. So this shows you Luke when he was first identified in 2014. And this shows him again in 2016, and you can see on the lower lobe of the caudal fin that marking there that allowed us to determine that this was Luke. Now the person who goes through this footage is an incredible scientist. He also works at the Massachusetts Division of Marine Fisheries, John Chisholm. And his job is using a computer just like this. He goes through and he reviews that GoPro footage, creates these screenshots, and then compares it to a larger catalog. And what's really amazing to me is that he's got so many of these sharks identified now that he doesn't always have to go back to the catalog. He'll see something, and just like it's a person, he recognizes and remembers which shark that actually is. What was really cool this past winter is that it wasn't just a year-to-year piece that we were able to examine footage. There were some surfers off the coast of Florida who actually had GoPros under their boards, and they got this footage of a white shark. And so then John was able to obtain that, and he compared it to white shark footage from up here in Massachusetts. Notice the difference in water clarity there? But so you can see, because of that chunk out of the dorsal fin, that shark that was in Florida was one of the sharks that's part of our population study up here. He was able to actually identify it. And then there comes the naming of the sharks. So early on, we started realizing, since we're a nonprofit organization, a great way to help fund this research would to actually allow people to name a shark. So we put it out there that it's a $1,000 donation to name a shark. So some of the sharks, there's one, Cool Beans, that's actually named after a family's dog. But then also, as a growing organization, we have some sharks that this year, we waited very patiently throughout the summer to try to find one new large male that we could name Big Poppy. And this was actually kind of a cool boost for us in social media because we put this out and Nessun picked it up, ESPN picked it up. We're trying to get Poppy out on the water because we think that would be really amazing. But so we have one shark that is named for Big Poppy. The other one, being a New England organization, we named one last year after Tom Brady. So then, the other weekend when Brady came back to play, we kind of put that back out there to remind everyone, because Brady was spotted off our coast again this year. But when we look at the naming of the sharks, this has been something that to me has been interesting, is that more and more people are asking about the names. And we're starting to see some sharks, people who are following the research actually create Twitter handles. And there are sharks like Mary Lee who has a Twitter. Or Catherine, she has a Twitter. And it's people who are just passionate about sharks, and they're tweeting out shark information, but they're doing it from one of these sharks' identities. For us, the naming really comes from, as I said, we found it's a great way to help fundraise for the research and that people can make a donation to name a shark. Some of the sharks are really just named because of the markings on their body, like Scratchy, or we have one named Lumpy because he's got a lump on the back on his caudal keel there. And so that's where, for us, the naming part really does come in. And then this video is entertaining because in getting this footage, it's really not easy. So this is another instance where we're working with a wild animal. We're not doing anything to alter the shark's behavior. So for the most part, it's just tricky maneuvering of the boat to get alongside and get a sweep on both the left side of the shark and the right side. And most of the sharks, the younger ones, the smaller ones, are pretty skittish. They see the camera and they go away. But this one you'll see in a moment. So he's putting that GoPro into the water. And instead of wanting to get away, this shark gets very curious. So you can see they're coming up on it. It's there off the left, that silhouette there. So he puts the GoPro in. And the shark decides, well, I want to figure out what you're doing. What is this? And so the shark actually follows that camera a bit and comes back around again to try to investigate and actually see, what is this that's going on? What are you doing? They were hoping he was actually going to bite the camera, but he never did. That was not a camera that was bitten, but so, these are the two projects that are going on right now, and there is already talk about what's next. What else do we want to try to figure out? So white sharks here in the Atlantic, there are a lot of questions about their behavior and what's going on. And now that we can see from the PSAT tags that they're diving down to these really great depths, there's the question, well, what are they doing when they get down there? Why are they diving to those great depths? So Dr. Skolma worked with the engineers at WHOI, the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, because they have this remote operated vehicle, Remus. And Remus, we also worked with Discovery Channel to do this, was also dubbed Shark Cam. And it's a vehicle that will follow the shark, and it has GoPro cameras all around it. So what they had to do is actually put a tag on the shark, which you see in this top right image, that would send out a ping, so then the remote operated vehicle would actually travel behind it and get that underwater footage of the shark. And they didn't do this here. They tested it and they worked on it with basking sharks here, but unfortunately the water quality up here in Massachusetts and the visibility made for something very difficult. We didn't get very strong video footage, so they went down to Guadalupe Island to test out this new equipment, and this is something that we will probably work with again and try to improve the image quality. It's going to be at a closer spot, but the shark actually came back and bit Remus in this. If you watch Shark Week, they show that. So this is one technology that we're working with and may use again in the future. The other one is critter cams. So people use critter cams for all different animals. And on this, so this is a white shark, and you can see that they attached the tag with the camera right onto it, and that was attached, and it was set to be on the shark for about 6 hours. That was the goal. However, she ended up shaking it off, and so they started going through all the footage, and they didn't get anything. They were hoping to have, you know, some great footage of the shark going in and feeding on a seal or something, shark's eye view. Instead, this was the one image that they really got from the shark. Do you know what that is? I heard someone say it. It's the research boat. So the shark then came up right behind the boat and, you know, almost like, well, what did you put on me? What is this crew? She had been following behind the research boat, and so she is credited for taking that photo there. So again, this is another piece, and we're looking at what's next. There's lots of incredible equipment, and when you look, you know, even just since the research started in 2009, the battery life of the tags has improved. You know, the initial tags that were put on these sharks didn't have a long battery life. Now we're working with acoustic tags that can give data for up to 10 years. So as technology continues to improve, what we can learn from these animals will be able to grow using all of that new equipment. The other cool thing that they did this past summer is they actually worked with a PhD student out of the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth, who one of the ways that when we're working with the sharks, we always try to figure out their size. So get those size estimates, and it's usually then done by comparing the aerial photo of the shark next to the boat, because we know how long the boat is, so if we can take that measurement and figure out that comparison, this is actually using sonar. So they put that sonar down beneath, and based on the shadow, what's returned, that's how they're looking to then get a more accurate measurement of how big these sharks are. So the other part of what we're doing as an organization is that public safety piece, and using the research that I explained to, you know, help in public safety efforts, because the Cape sees such an increase in its population over the summer months, and everyone's going there to use the beaches. And I think that this photo is really funny because it was taken from someone's Instagram, and you can see how they had put those nice filters on it and everything, and it looks like this very set stage scene. But it really was the reality, as the person, you know, heard them yell, you know, over the radio, there's a shark off the coast, and so she turned to look, see what the lifeguards were going to do, and she caught them as they were reacting right in that moment. So what we do is there is a shark working group on Cape Cod, and it's made up of harbor masters, it's made up of representatives from the National Seashore, some members of the National Park Service, there are some selectmen, and then the researchers. And during the winter months we come together and we look at the data, we share that information with these people who work on those beaches, and then, you know, we look at what can we do to try to help improve public safety. And one of the things that changed this year was the signage. So there were always signs on the beaches that said, you know, predatory animal off this coast, you need to be aware. But it was in Orleans that the harbor master said, I want a bigger and stronger sign, because they were seeing people kind of blow right by it or not take in the real seriousness about how shallow. We're seeing these sharks come into about 4 feet of water right off the public swimming beaches at times. So, you know, stronger signage to really catch people in their face and make them aware. Because if you live in this area in the summer months, you hear about the white shark research. You hear that it's going on, so it's not this foreign idea to you. However, we have a lot of people who come not just from across the country, but from across the world. And so making sure that there's something to catch and grab their attention. The other piece that you saw in this photo are these purple shark flags. So one of the other pieces of information that in this group came back is that it was almost like people saw the sign, they took it in, but then by the time they got to the beach an hour later, you know, out of sight, out of mind, they kind of forgot about it, and they were still going out into deeper water. So they wanted something on the beaches to remind people that there is this predatory animal right there that they need to be aware of. So that's what the purple shark flag actually represents, that there's a predatory animal in the water and you need to be aware of your surroundings. And they're always flying. So the whole summer month, there's not a shift in color like in South Africa. Their flag system, they actually change colors. Different flags mean different things. Because the research boat is not always out, and because of the angles from where our lifeguards sit, they're not always going to be able to spot a shark. You, as someone going into the water to use it recreationally, need to be aware of your surrounding. We want to put that on you. And so, you know, it's always purple, so that people are always keeping mindful of the sharks being there. And so to put it into perspective, this photo was just taken about 2.5 weeks ago, and it shows you how close these sharks are coming in. So this is a stand-up paddleboarder, and he has no idea that that white shark is there behind him. And there's the wave crest there, surface on the inside, then you have the shark right there on the outside of it. So you know, the hard part is in these conversations about public safety. You know, I went to a public hearing and people were sitting there and they're like, well, why don't you fly planes all the time? Or why don't you put drones up? Why do you think we don't do that? Why don't you think we have drones flying up and down the coast to put out a sound every time they spot a shark? Expense is one part, absolutely. But if you knew that there was going to be a drone out there putting out a big alarm every time it sees a shark, is that what you're going to rely on? So a lot of what you look at in terms of public safety, you know, for us it's about education and creating awareness, because we don't want people to then rely on the lifeguards or a spotter pilot to mark them. White sharks are incredibly smart predators. You know, they're an apex predator for a reason. They know how to sneak up and attack on their prey. Now, they don't want to attack a person. As I said before, our white sharks off of Cape Cod are really snobby and they want that giant steak dinner of a gray seal. They don't want to go after something small like this. They can actually sense that difference. But mistakes do happen. But a lot of the conversations we have about public safety are, you know, education and how can we make sure that people are being aware about, you know, taking their own risk assessment when they go into the water. And so to help people when they make that assessment on where they would want to go surfing or swimming, we did come out with an app this past year. It launched July 1st. So this is an app, it's called Sharktivity, and it shares the research with the people. So each of those blue fins you see on here represents a shark sighting. And you can go back, so you can look at the last 2 days, the week, the month, the year, and you can look at these areas where sharks have been spotted. What's also great about it is that it can also allow people to be citizen scientists. So we realized early on is that other people were going out in their boats and they were seeing sharks and they put videos up on YouTube. We're like, well, we want that video, we want that footage. We could use that for the population count and, you know, use that footage. So it allows people that if they see a white shark in its environment, they can take a photo and actually submit it. And then that third part about the education, we're doing this in a few different ways. And one way that we launched this year is actually ecotourism. So as I said when I first started, what allowed me to have my shift in how I viewed sharks was actually seeing one up close in the wild. So we worked with Chatham Barzin this past season to bring people out so that they could see great white sharks. So it's a 2.5-hour excursion. You're right behind the research vessel. The spotter pilot is in the air, and you're able to follow and see everything that's happening. And we were able to bring 100 people out this past year through this program and give them an opportunity to see this animal not as that scene from Jaws like they had probably pictured, but see it as the incredible animal that it is as it swam and moved through the water with power and grace. So ecotourism is one way. We're trying to change public perception and educate people about what's going on with the research, but also, you know, working with all ages. And that a big part of what we realized early on is that especially the younger generation living in this area, you know, they hear everything that their parents are talking about and they hear what's going on in the news. So when it comes out, oh, they tagged a white shark today, instead of the kid just hearing it and thinking, oh my gosh, white shark, that's the beach that I go to, they're thinking, oh, well then we're able to track the movement of that shark and we're going to learn more about its behavior and where it's going. So building that knowledge about what's happening on every level, you know, not just adults who understand it, but even with the younger kids and putting it at a level so that they can understand, so that everyone, as they hear what's going on in the news, they actually get the reality of what's going on and why it's important to be tracking this information and working with these animals.